The desert stretched without mercy, a horizon of heat and bone. The wind carried sand like needles, whispering to the broken ribs of cacti and the dry husks of long-dead grass. Out of that emptiness came a single rider, his horse moving slow, steady, as though the land itself fought every step. Dust clung to his coat, his hat brim shadowed his face, and his silence was heavier than the revolver at his hip. He rode until the outline of a town revealed itself. Half hidden by the shimmer of heat, a crooked cluster of timber and adobe hunched against the desolation. The closer he drew, the uglier it became. A church tower leaned as if tires standing. Doors swung loose on rusted hinges. And there was no music, no laughter, just a groan of shutters slamming shut when the rider passed. The stranger slowed his horse before the saloon, dismounted with the grace of a man who carried exhaustion like a second skin. Spurs clicked once, then silence. He pushed through the doors. Inside, the air stank of sour whiskey and fear. A piano sat against the wall, but its keys were broken, yellowed, and the stool beside it was empty. The room froze. Men looked up from their drinks, hard eyes measuring the figure in the doorway. The stranger did not speak. He moved to the bar, each step echoing. His hand brushed dust from his coat, and when he set a coin on the wood, the barkeep's fingers trembled as he reached for it. The drink poured was thin, bitter, but the man drank it as if it were rain. Only then did he lift his gaze. At one table, for men wore the same expression, mean, hungry. Their belts sagged with pistols. Their hands rested too close to the grips. Across the room, another cluster of men watched with equal malice. Though their coats were finer, their hats sharper. The division was sharp as a knife, and the stranger needed no words to know this town was carved into two. Outside, a laugh cut through the silence, loud, cruel. Hooves struck the street, followed by gunfire so sudden and sharp it rattled the glass in the saloon windows. The stranger turned his head just enough to see through the dusty panes. A wagon was burning in the street, flames licking upward, smoke curling black against the sky. Bodies lay sprawled beside it, motionless. Men on horseback circled like wolves, their pistols raised, their voices shouting victory in words that sounded more like growls than language. The saloon stirred. Some looked away as if nothing unusual had happened. Others smirked, satisfied it wasn't their blood staining the dirt. The stranger's jaw tightened, though his face revealed little else. He set the empty glass down and rose. On the street, the factions revealed themselves more clearly. To the left, the gun runners, their weapons displayed like trophies, their laughter the sound of broken glass. To the right, the smugglers, faces cold, smiles like blades, their power wrapped in calculation rather than fire. Between them lay the dead, collateral in a war with no end. The stranger stood in the saloon doorway, neither side claiming him, both sides watching. One of the riders from the burning wagon dismounted, swaggered toward him, and spat in the dirt. New face. The man said, words dripping with challenge. You looking to die quick or slow? The stranger's eyes lifted, calm as a shadow before dusk. His hand hovered near his holster, not yet touching. The air between them tightened. Every onlooker leaning forward, hungry for the sound of gunfire. But the man hesitated, just for a breath. The stranger's silence was heavier than threat. His stance was effortless, yet it spoke louder than words. If you draw, you won't live long enough to regret it. The rider sneered, muttered something foul, then turned away, hiding his unease in laughter. His companions joined him, though their eyes never left the stranger. That evening the town fell quiet, as though even the crickets had been silenced. The stranger walked the main street, boots sinking into dust. Every shuttered window felt like an eye watching. On one side, men armed with rifles loitered outside a store, marking their claim. On the other, more men leaned against walls, smoking, their fingers resting on blades. No lawmen, no peace. Only two vultures circling the same carcass, waiting for the other to starve. The stranger took a room in the inn, a crooked house of warped beams and thin walls. The keeper said nothing, just slid a key across the counter, his eyes darting like a man who had learned fear too well. The room itself was bare, a cot in the corner, a cracked window facing the desert. The stranger placed his revolver on the table beside the bed, the weight of it echoing louder than words. Through the window, he watched the horizon darken. Lightning flared in the distance, silent for now, but promising a storm. The town below whispered like a dying man, and the stranger knew the silence was only the surface. Beneath it lay a hunger, a war waiting to be fed. He leaned back, the chair creaking, eyes never leaving the street. Two families, two tyrannies, a town caught between them like a lamb in the jaws of wolves. And now, a third force had entered, quiet, patient, unreadable. The stranger closed his eyes, but not to rest. His mind was sharp, measuring every glance, every twitch, every line of division he had seen. He was no drifter by accident. He had come for a reason, though the town did not yet know it. When the first crack of thunder rolled across the desert, the stranger opened his eyes again. He reached a cigar in his coat, lit it, and let the smoke drift into the stale room. Outside, the street was empty, but tension hung thick as the storm clouds gathering above. Somewhere in the dark, a woman cried out, her voice sharp before it was silenced. A door slammed. Then nothing but the wind. The stranger stood, holstered his weapon, and stepped to the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. A face carved by dust and distance, unreadable as a desert night. Lightning split the horizon, and in its flash the town looked less like a place of the living than a graveyard waiting to be filled. He exhaled smoke, slow, deliberate. His lips barely moved, but the words lingered in the silence. This place is already dead. The storm began to break, and the stranger did not turn away. He knew death was coming, and the desert would remember the sound. Morning brought no peace, only the smell of ash. The wagon burned into blackened ribs during the night, its carcass still smoldering in the street. The town awoke to it as though nothing unusual had happened. Men spitting tobacco as they passed, women drawing water with their eyes fixed on the ground, children darting through alleys like mice desperate to avoid the hawks overhead. The stranger stood outside the inn, a shadow among shadows, his coat drawn close against the grit, rising in the wind. He did not have to wait long. Power has a way of sniffing out disruption, and his arrival was already a fracture in the fragile order. The first emissary came before noon, a man dressed in rough leather, his hands scarred by years of gun oil and whiskey. He carried the arrogance of one who thought himself feared, but his eyes betrayed calculation. He invited the stranger to a back room of the saloon, away from listening ears. The room smelled of sweat and old blood. The emissary poured whiskey into 2 chip glasses and pushed one across the table. "You've got a look," he said, voice heavy with smoke. "The kind that knows how to kill and stays standing after. My people could use a man like that." The stranger's face betrayed nothing. He lifted the glass, sipped once, and set it down again. His silence drew out like rope. The emissary leaned forward. "Gold's easy here. Women, too, if you the appetite. You ride with us. You'll eat well, drink better, maybe even live longer." No answer, only the stranger's eyes, dark and steady, measuring. The emissary mistook quiet for hesitation and pressed harder. "Choose right, and you'll never beg again. Choose wrong, well, you've seen the streets." The stranger rose, adjusted his coat, and walked out. No words, no nod, just the creak of the floorboards under his boots. The emissary sat frozen, realizing too late that he had been dismissed. By dusk, the second offer arrived. This one wore polished boots and a coat too fine for the desert, but his smile was sharper than any blade. He met the stranger in a shuttered cantina, where the dust on the bottles spoke of years untouched. "You're a man without chains," the second emissary said smoothly, pouring wine that smelled faintly of rot. "That makes you dangerous. To some, a problem. To me, an opportunity. Work with us, and you'll have power. Not scraps, not coin that burns away with the night, but power, the kind that lasts." The stranger tilted the glass in his hand, watching the liquid swirl. The man continued, his words precise, deliberate. "We're not thugs like the others. We deal in trade, in routes, in the future. You'd be wise to stand with men who know how to build, not just burn." The stranger's lips curved, barely. Not a smile, more shadow of one, unreadable. He drank, set the glass down, and stood. Another offer met with silence. Another man left unsettled. By the end of the week, both factions were restless. Each had seen the stranger meet with their rivals. Each had tasted the uncertainty of his presence. And in the dust-filled streets, whispers grew. Whose side was he on? The answer was neither. The stranger moved between them like a phantom, dropping a word here, a glance there, just enough to sharpen suspicion. A wrong name at the right moment, a rumor spoken in passing. It was not much, but in a town where trust was already poisoned, it was enough to spread rot. The first duel broke out by the well. Two men from rival camps faced off in the sun, spurred on by words that had grown sharper in the shadows. The stranger watched from a distance as pistols cleared leather. A flash, a crack, and one body fell face first into the dust, crimson soaking the earth. The crowd that gathered did not mourn. They only watched silent, as if bloodshed was no more surprising than sunrise. The stranger's face was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the lifeless form longer than most. Then he turned away, boots carrying him to the far end of town, where the noise of conflict faded into something softer. There at the edge of the broken church, he found them, a woman and her child. The woman's face was drawn, her hair unkempt, her dress patched and torn. She carried herself with the brittle strength of someone who had survived more losses than she dared count. The child, no older than 6, clutched her skirt, eyes wide with fear too heavy for youth. The stranger paused, as though uncertain of his own presence there. The woman looked up, startled, then wary. No words passed between them at first, only silence, the kind that weighs heavier than speech. Finally she whispered, "You're not one of them." The stranger's gaze shifted to the child, then back to her. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he reached into his coat, drew out a small piece of bread saved from his own rations, and placed on the church steps. Then he walked away. The woman called after him, not with words of thanks, but with the question every soul in that town carried. "Why are you here?" He did not answer. His boots carried him back into the dust, leaving the bread behind. That night, the faction struck again. A shack on the edge of town was set ablaze, its flames lighting the sky red. Screams split the air, cut short by gunfire. The stranger stood in shadow, watching the fire consume the wood, the heat beating against his face. Men shouted, rifles cracked, but he did not move, only when the structure collapsed in on itself, sparks rising like a swarm of angry stars. Did he turn away? His eyes were hard, but deep inside them, something shifted, an old memory perhaps, or a wound that had never healed. The church bell tolled once, hollow, as if in mourning. The sound carried through the streets, echoing off broken walls. The stranger looked up at the tower, its silhouette crooked against the night sky. The bell swung again, then stilled. The town was unraveling, thread by thread, and he was a knife in its weave. The first shot came at dawn, sharp as a whip crack, echoing through the narrow streets. It was answered by another, then a dozen more, until the air itself seemed to shiver with lead. Smoke drifted over rooftops. Horses screamed. Men shouted names and curses, their voices ragged with bloodlust. The stranger stepped from the inn into chaos. 2 bodies lay sprawled in the dirt already, one with his hand still gripping a pistol he never fired. Across the way, rifles spat fire from behind barrels, bullets shattering windows and chewing into walls. The war that had lingered like a storm on the horizon had broken. The factions had thrown themselves into open slaughter. He moved to the gunfire with a predator's patience, slipping from shadow to shadow, eyes taking in the unraveling of the town. Every corner had become a battlefield. The smugglers and the gun runners tore at each other with the desperation of animals who understood there was no turning back. A boy darted across the street, too small to understand the madness. A shot rang out, missing him by inches. The stranger's hand moved without thought. His revolver barked once, the shooter crumpling from a rooftop, landing broken in the dust. The boy vanished into an alley, saved but scarred, his wide eyes never leaving the dark figure who had spared him. For a moment, the stranger lingered, watching the alley, and something unreadable flickered across his face. Then a blow struck the back of his skull, blinding light bursting in his vision. Rough hands grabbed him, dragging him down into the dirt. Boots kicked his ribs, fists rained down, voices jeered. They hauled him into a barn at the edge of town. The air stank of manure and rust. Rope cut into his wrists as they tied him, throwing him against the beams like a sack of grain. Laughter filled the space, hard, cruel, the kind of laughter that feeds on another man's suffering. One stepped forward, a brute with eyes like cold stone. Thought you could play both sides, stranger? Thought you could walk in here and make fools of us. His fist drove into the stranger's gut, forcing a grunt but no cry. Blood ran down the corner of the stranger's mouth, yet his eyes stayed steady, unbroken. The beating dragged on, fists and boots reducing his body to bruises and pain. They wanted him to break, to scream, to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. But the stranger gave them nothing. Silence was his shield, his defiance louder than any curse. At last they tired of it, leaving him bound in the dark. The barn door slammed shut, the lock clanged into place. Their laughter faded into storm outside, leaving him with only the rasp of his own breath and the sting of wounds too deep to count. For a time, he lay still, eyes closed, as if surrendering to the black. Then, slowly he began to move, wrists strained against the rope, shoulders twisted, muscles screaming. Sweat poured, blood slickened the bindings, until finally the fiber frayed. With one final wrench, he tore free. The stranger collapsed onto the dirt floor, gasping, but he did not linger. He pushed himself upright, staggering toward the faint crack of light, where the boards did not meet. A nail jutted loose, rusted. He drove it into the wood until it gave way, widening the gap. Outside, the storm had broken, rain falling hard, drumming on the roof, washing the blood from the earth. He slipped out into the downpour, soaked within seconds, wounds stinging under the cold wash. Each step was agony, yet he pressed forward, guided not by survival alone, but by something heavier, older. His eyes were set, his jaw firm, as though the storm itself had called him back from death. The town was in ruins. Fire sputtered in the rain, smoke trailing weakly into the sky. Men lay dead in the mud, their guns still clenched in lifeless fingers. Others limped through the streets, too broken to continue the fight, too stubborn to stop it. The factions had bled themselves nearly dry, yet hatred still fueled their aim. The stranger moved unseen among them, slipping into the ruins of the church. Inside, the air was damp, candles long since burned out, the altar cracked. He leaned against the wall, catching his breath, but his eyes never softened. Instead, he reached for the revolver they had taken from him. It rested on the altar, left as an insult perhaps, or a warning. He picked it up, weighed it in his hand, spun the cylinder once. The click was soft, intimate. With his other hand, he drew a blade hidden in his boot, sharpening it against stone. Sparks lit the shadows. Each sound was steady, deliberate, the rhythm of a man preparing not for survival, but for reckoning. As the rain hammered down outside, his mind sharpened with it. He saw the faces of the men who laughed while beating him. He saw the woman at the church steps, clutching her child. He saw the boy darting across the street, nearly swallowed by bullets not meant for him. He saw fire consuming homes while the families clawed at the dirt in silence. This was not about coin. Not anymore, if it ever had been. The stranger's silence was not emptiness. It was weight, a burden he carried from elsewhere, from wounds unseen. And here, in this town of vultures and fire, he had found the place to lay it down. He loaded his revolver with slow precision, each cartridge sliding home like a bell tolling. His hands, though bruised, moved with the ease of long practice. When the weapon was ready, he holstered it, rose to his feet, and stepped out into the storm. The streets glistened with rain and blood, the two mingling until they were indistinguishable. Lightning split the sky, framing his silhouette against the ruins of town. Every step he took seemed to echo, though the thunder drowned all else. He lit a cigar, the flame bright against the downpour, smoke curling into the wet air. His face was carved from stone, his eyes fixed on the heart of the town where the factions still fought over scraps of power. He inhaled once, slow, deliberate. Then he spoke, his voice low, rough, as though pulled from the depths of the earth itself. It ends tomorrow. The rain carried his words into the silence, and the storm raged on. Dawn bled across the horizon, pale light slicing through the last of the storm. The rain had scoured the streets clean of dust, but left them stained with mud and blood. Smoke curled from collapsed roofs, drifting like exhausted ghosts. The town stood quiet for the first time in days, but it was not peace. It was a hell breath before a killing blow. The stranger stepped into Main Street, boots sinking into the wet earth. His coat clung heavy to his shoulders, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much. He walked slow, each step deliberate, as though the weight of the desert itself pressed behind him. At his hip, the revolver rested, polished by rain, ready. Doors creaked open, shutters lifted. Townsfolk peered out, silent, gaunt, as if they knew the end was near. And then the factions came. First the gun runners, swaggering with rifles slung and pistols loose, their laughter jagged, brittle. Then the smugglers, neat in their cruel precision, their leaders' eyes glinting like steel. They fanned out across the street, two tides converging on the same shore. At the center stood the stranger, still as a stone. The jeers began. There he is, the rat who thought he could play us. String him up. Their voices were venom, but beneath it lay unease. He had survived fire, storm, and steel. He had returned when he should have been buried. The gun runner's chief stepped forward, face twisted with rage. You should have stayed in the dirt, stranger. Now you'll die slow. The smuggler's captain answered from the other side, voice cold, measured. No, he dies quick. Then we end this town once and for all. Two enemies, united only in their hatred of one man. The stranger's hand hovered near his holster, fingers loose, relaxed. His eyes swept them, each twitch, each stance, every man's weight shifting in mud. He spoke at last, his voice low, steady as thunder beyond the hills. You've taken enough. Silence cut the air, sharp as a blade. Then a pistol cracked. The street exploded. Gunfire roared from both sides, smoke rolling thick. The stranger moved with a calm that mocked the chaos. Each draw smooth, each shot final. One man fell clutching his chest. Another spun backward, rifle clattering into the muck. Bullets screamed past his hat, tore splinters from walls. But none found him. He was a shadow between thunderclaps, striking and vanishing, death with a heartbeat. Bodies dropped. Horses reared. The factions turned on each other mid-slaughter. Suspicion finally unmasked as hate. The stranger wove through it, his revolver barking until the chamber was empty, his blade flashing when distance closed. Blood sprayed into the rain-soaked earth, mixing with mud, with memory. When the echoes faded, a dozen men lay broken in the street. Smoke drifted from the stranger's revolver as he reloaded, each cartridge sliding in with a click like a drumbeat. The survivors backed away, breath ragged, eyes wide. For the first time, their laughter was gone. Then, from the shadow of the saloon, he appeared, the true hand behind the war. Not the chiefs who shouted and bled, but the figure who had pulled strings from silence. A man cloaked in black, his face lined with greed and cold intent. He had let the town rot, fed the fire, grown fat on its ashes. He walked forward with the calm of one who believed himself untouchable. So this is the ghost that haunts my streets. His voice was smooth, quiet, carrying even over the wind. I built this war. You think you can end it? The stranger said nothing. He stood, rain sliding off his brim, hand near his weapon. The two men faced each other, the town holding its breath. No laughter now, no jeers, only silence, as if the earth itself waited. The puppet master drew first, quick as a viper, but the stranger was quicker. One shot cracked the morning wide open. The man staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, clutching his chest as crimson spread across his black coat. He fell to his knees, mouth working for words that never came, then collapsed face first into the mud. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The smoke curled from the stranger's revolver, drifting upward like an offering to the storm. Then it was done. The factions scattered, broken, leaderless. Some dropped their weapons in the mud. Others fled into the desert. The town, for the first time in years, was silent, not with fear, but with release. The stranger holstered his weapon and stood alone in the center of the street. From the ruins of the church, the woman emerged, her child clinging to her skirt. Their eyes found him, and for the first time, his face shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but softening, a shadow of humanity breaking through the stone. The boy looked at him with something more than fear now, something like hope. The stranger tipped his hat, a gesture small but heavy with meaning. Then he turned. He walked to his horse, waiting patient at the edge of town. The saddle creaked as he mounted. The reins pulled taut. He did not look back as he guided the animal forward, hooves striking slow, steady against the wet earth. The townsfolk watched from doorways and windows, their silence following him. None spoke thanks. None asked his name. In their eyes, he was not a savior, not a friend. He was a force, a storm that passed, leaving them with a quiet they had forgotten. At the edge of the desert, he paused, the horizon burning with the first light of sun. Smoke still rose behind him, but ahead lay endless sky, endless dust. He lit a cigar, drew deep, exhaled into the wind. His voice was barely more than a whisper, carried only to himself in the wasteland. Dust takes everything, but it never keeps the silence. He nudged the horse forward. Its hooves faded into the distance until only the wind remained. The town stood behind him, broken but free. The desert swallowed his silhouette, and the silence stretched on.